Hello, everyone. I'm Ella Daniels coming to you from the Partnership for a Healthier America. I'm so excited to welcome you to our event today, PHA and medical professionals teaming up to raise a generation of veggie lovers. Welcome. In a new research paper released in January and available on our website, PHA analyzed research shows that exposure to veggies early and often is key to raising adventurous, healthy eaters for life. If you haven't already, I encourage you to download and read our paper titled, Yes, Kids Can Learn to Love Veggies. We are now on a mission to disseminate key points from this research and to translate research into action through a new nutrition education campaign called Veggies Early and Often. Our goal is to improve the food landscape for the nation's youngest eaters through a veggie forward approach. The Veggies Early and Often campaign is led by the Partnership for a Healthier America and a growing group of medical professionals, early childhood educators, and industry leaders. In a moment, I have the privilege of introducing you to 4 of our 13 inaugural campaign partners. We're so excited that this work has captured your interest today. We're so encouraged by what a broad range of medical professionals there are on today's call, including dietitians, family physicians, public health officials, WIC directors, and more. We couldn't be more excited to have you here. We hope that this is the beginning of a much bigger conversation about what we all can be doing to raise a generation of veggie lovers. So in terms of what to expect for our conversation today, we have a packed hour agenda for you. So we're going to have a panel of experts walk us through key points from our research paper, followed by a panel discussion. And after that, we have time for an audience Q&A that we encourage you to participate in. By the end of this call, if we've done our job, we hope to have accomplished 3 things. Number 1, that we can all agree medical professionals play a critical role in helping us raise a generation of veggie lovers. Number 2, that you're inspired to integrate this research into your current work and practice and into your community. And number 3, that in light of the reality of your busy practice, that we have offered you really actionable tools and really practical advice about how to begin these conversations in the course of a visit with patients. So now that we've set the table for today's conversation, we're ready to dig in. So I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for today. Our first speaker I want to introduce you to is Katie Thompson. Katie Thompson is a mom of 2 and a registered dietitian with a master's in nutrition. She's the co-founder and CEO of Square Baby, offering customized 100% daily nutrition and allergen introduction meal plans made with fresh organic ingredients and delivered to your doorstep. Prior to dreaming up and launching Square Baby, Katie worked at Starbucks as their first nutritionist. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Rupa Mahadevan. Dr. Rupa Mahadevan is a pediatrician who specializes in integrative medicine. She runs a pediatric weight management clinic and works with cancer patients to help optimize nutrition in their diet for disease prevention and healthy living. She teaches culinary medicine at LSU Medical School and is also an advisor to Little Gourmets. Welcome, Dr. Mahadevan. Our third speaker is Dr. Namali Fernando. Dr. Yum, as we call her, is the founder of the nonprofit The Dr. Yum Project, the owner of Yum Pediatrics, a nutrition-focused practice with a teaching kitchen and a garden. She is also the co-author of the parenting book, Raising a Healthy, Happy Eater, and Dr. Yum's Preschool Food Adventure, a research-backed cooking and nutrition curriculum. Welcome, Dr. Yum. And last but not least is Shabani Baluja. Shabani is the founder and CEO of Little Gourmets. Little Gourmets strives to cultivate curiosity in kids by introducing them to the unique tastes, textures, and cuisines at an early age to help them fall in love with vegetables and diverse, culturally rich foods for life. Before being consumed with creating healthy kids' food, Shabani spent nearly a decade at Kraft Foods, most recently as their director of mergers and acquisitions. Hello, Shabani.
Hello.
Great. So now that you've met everyone, I will pass it over to you, Shabani, founder and CEO of Little Gourmets, to walk us through the research to support the Veggies Early and Often campaign.
Great. Thank you, Ella. Hello, everyone. We're so excited to have you here and to share this important and emerging research. As a mom, I know how much new parents turn to their pediatricians and trusted health professionals for guidance in introducing their babies to first foods, and as they get older, how to get them to eat more nutritious foods. And as a mom of a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, I know the guidance changed even from having my first kid to having my second baby. So for the first half of our time today together, we want to share the 4 key pieces of this latest research that is detailed in the PHA white paper. And we want to make this a bit interactive. So we've got 4 poll questions that we'll ask you all to participate in. We'll ask them one by one, and then Katie, Rupa, and Namali will walk us through the poll results and the underlying research. After the polls, we'll go into a Q&A session with questions that were submitted during the registration process and questions that are submitted live. So throughout the session, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A. So with that, let's get to our first question. So, what percent of children consume the recommended amounts of vegetables? Is it 45%? Is it 33%, 20%, or 10%? And we'll give you a minute to answer that. But we can see that whatever the answer is to this question, it appears that our kids are not getting enough vegetables. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who will walk us through the results of the poll and provide some color on why we need to increase consumption of vegetables.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Shabani. So I'm going to exit out of this real quick. So yes, infants, toddlers, and preschoolers are really not eating enough vegetables. Only about 10% of children consume the recommended amount of veggies. This is really a problem. Another finding in the white paper that was really astonishing to me is that 30% of toddlers and preschoolers eat less than 1 serving of veggies per day. And here's why veggie intake is so important. The association between fruit and vegetable intake and prevention of chronic diseases is well documented, as I'm sure that you all know. Research shows that diets rich in fruits and veggies, especially green leafy veggies, can help prevent chronic disease and obesity later in life. And we know that dietary habits formed early in life track into childhood. We also know that infancy is a critical period for developing taste preferences and establishing these lifelong healthy habits. In fact, at 4 to 7 months, babies are most willing to accept new foods and flavors. This is why it's so important to offer veggies early and often. It's our goal, as I'm sure it is yours, to help babies develop their palate and grow to be an adventurous eater who loves a variety of foods, including veggies, and sets our babies up for a lifetime of healthy eating.
Great. Thank you, Katie. So I don't think anyone here disputes the importance of veggies, but we still all struggle. So let's get a bit into how to get our kids to eat more veggies. So our second poll here. True or false? Oops, let me see if that's popping up. Okay, true or false? It can take 10 or more tastes for a child to accept a new vegetable. And to take us through the results and the underlying research here, I'll hand it over to Namali.
Yeah, so 10 sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Especially when you're a parent. But it's true. We need that many exposures because children really are born with a preference towards sweet and salty foods, but some of these other tastes, bitter and sour, aren't necessarily intuitive, and they're not accepted on first pass. And so it really does take a lot of practice, and it takes us as healthcare providers a lot of encouragement that, you know, if a child doesn't like that fruit or vegetable in the first 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 tries, that there's still work to do. And I think that message is really important. And it is important also that we not stop when we see children making a face. I always think about children when the first time they taste a sour lemon, they may make a face, but often they grab that lemon again and they want another taste. So the face that they make doesn't mean that you should stop necessarily. And children do need a lot of that practice. And it's also important, the visual, as we learned in the white paper, the visual is really important. Kids need to see those foods. And remember, we taste first with our eyes. So that visual is very important as well. I also wanted to make mention of toddlers, because in my experience, that's really when a lot of parents struggle with this flavor training, because it's almost as if we're starting over, right? Toddlers develop this neophobia. And so what I do often is I'll sit down with parents of 12-month-olds and I have the toddler feeding talk. And I show them that in the second year of life, the growth curve really dramatically slows and plateaus. And so children at that age, they don't need as much food as when they were infants. And so we may have to retrain them with another 10 or so exposures. But this time around, these toddlers actually have some will and they can say no and they can move. They're not a captive audience. So we have to be able to give these parents some strategies, much like the division of responsibility, which I often mention. Parents are responsible for providing those meals and they decide what they are, when and where. And toddlers decide if they want to eat and how much. And I often encourage parents of toddlers that you're lucky to get 1 or 2 good meals in a toddler. So we have to provide that variety and that practice so they can relearn these foods again. And one other quick thing, I think it's important to be strategic about what we put on a plate, because the research shows kids have their favorite foods, let's say buttered noodles. They have their foods that they'll sometimes eat. Maybe it's a sweet potato. And then they have foods that they're practicing. Maybe it's asparagus we're trying. If you put a favorite food and a new practice food on the plate, the child is probably more likely to take that practice food and put it to the side and go for that favorite food, those buttered noodles. However, if we put a sometimes food like the sweet potatoes on the same plate as the new food, then the research shows that they're probably going to try that sometimes food and maybe even dabble in that new practice food. And what happens if we keep doing that is that practice food becomes a sometimes food and the sometimes food becomes a favorite food. So I think strategies like that are important. It's not just that we offer variety, but that we offer those practice foods a lot. And that we also offer children an opportunity to become hungry and that we're not always feeding them those easy snacks. So when they come to the table, they're ready to practice those new foods.
Wow, thank you so much, Namali. That was just a gold mine of information. So let's go to our third poll question. So when it comes, I'm gonna give it a second, there we go. When it comes to veggies, what is most important? Is it nutrition, variety, quantity, texture, flavor, or all of the above? So for this, we'll hand it over to Rupa. So Rupa, tell us, if our kids love broccoli, can we just keep feeding them broccoli every night and be happy that they're at least eating that?
So I always say, any vegetable that you get your kid to eat is definitely kudos to a parent and caregiver. But what we really do know from the research is that it's all of the above. Variety, texture, flavor is all extremely important. I know for me personally, what we do know from the science and the research is variety is truly key. We know that the more variety children have in their diet, especially through infancy in terms of the exposure to different vegetables, the better their health outcomes are later on. And one of the reasons for that is every vegetable has different phytonutrients in it. For example, red vegetables tend to be high in lycopene, where orange vegetables tend to be high in beta carotene, and all these different vitamins and minerals really provide different health benefits. Lycopene, for example, is an antioxidant, where vegetables that are very rich in green substances such as kale and spinach are extremely high in manganese, vitamin A, vitamin K. So we know that the more variety infants and toddlers get in terms of the vegetables they're exposed to, really the better off their immune system is to function at its optimal speed. And when we're also thinking about textures, we know that different vegetables provide early exposure when it comes to chewing. We really need those muscles of mastication. And we know that what it takes to chew a sweet potato is very different from what it takes to chew a green pepper. So really exposing children to that variety of texture is important for their speech development as well as their overall acceptance to different vegetables. We know that infants should be exposed to a variety of different flavors as well. For example, squash tastes extremely different than spinach. And the more flavors children are exposed to in its raw form, we know that the more acceptance they'll have later on in childhood to vegetables and new novel foods. So, although broccoli is great, variety truly is the most important thing of all. And we know that the willingness for children to develop palates that are rich in testing and trying new things really comes down to the acceptance that they have at a very early age for that variety that they're exposed to.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rupa. Okay, so let's go to our last question here. And for this one, we'll turn to Namali. So Namali, true or false? Caregiver fruit and vegetable intake is associated with young children's fruit and vegetable intake. So Namali, how important is it for parents and caregivers to eat their veggies?
Yes, this is a question that's near and dear to my heart. It is so important. However, the reality is that only about 10% of adults are getting the recommended servings of vegetables in a day. So if we want these children to continue to be good vegetable eaters, we have to really consider a family approach so that the parents are also learning to eat those foods along with their children. And I love being able to give families recipes so that we don't tell families what they shouldn't eat, but we show them what they can eat. And we show them that their babies also, and their toddlers, their preschoolers, all of the ages of children that might be in their family can share a family meal together. And that we don't necessarily have to have special kid-friendly food for all the different ages of kids in the family. That if we do this flavor training and introduction of vegetables early and often, that we can raise a family together that continues that in that trajectory. And that's why I love sharing recipes so much, especially family recipes that can, be adopted or adapted to even the youngest eaters.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to all three of you for walking us through the key findings of this, the white paper. I think the research is fascinating, and I hope everyone here thinks the same. It is relatively unknown. So I know personally in my company, I talked to thousands of parents, and it was apparent that the baby food phase is one of confusion and one that parents want to just get past. But we now know that so much good can come during this phase. And we know that it'll take a good amount of education to really benefit from those findings. So a lot of work to be done here, but I hope, glad to have you guys along with us. So now let's move on to the Q&A portion of our session. So we provided everyone with the opportunity to submit questions in advance, and you can also submit them live. So I'm going to start with a few of the questions that were submitted in advance of the session. So Katie, let's start with you. So an audience member asked, as a pediatrician, my biggest issue is when parents say, my kid doesn't like, let's say, Brussels sprouts, when in actuality, it's the parent who doesn't like Brussels sprouts. So related to what Namali just took us through. So how do you respond to this?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. One that's just rooted in reality as a parent ourselves, right? But I think that it's really important to understand why the food isn't being offered. Is it a lifestyle preference, a religious reason? Is another family member avoiding this food because of a diet or even a food allergy and just prefers not to have the food in the house? Again, important to understand the why, but equally important to consider the infant's nutritional needs at this time, of course. So making sure that they're offered foods that are high in iron and zinc, like meat, poultry, and beans, choline, like eggs, vitamin D, and omega-3s from salmon, for example, calcium, fiber, and phytonutrients from green leafies are so important. And remember, as we were just talking about, that babies are accepting new foods much easier than adults and toddlers. So you may hate asparagus or cauliflower or any of those things, but your baby may really take to it and love it. Or you might be avoiding red meat. I'm someone who hasn't liked red meat since I was a small child, but your baby could really benefit from the heme iron. So really making those decisions based on your child and what's important to your family, but not necessarily based on taste preferences. I think another consideration is food allergies. So whether you're avoiding a food from an allergy that you may have, thinking about the fact that early allergen introduction can actually help food allergies from developing is really important. And knowing that 4 to 7 months is such a critical period for this early allergen introduction, as well as we now know that under 12 months, so babies younger than 12 months are actually have less of a reaction. So it's a safer time to introduce these allergens in that first 12 months of life.
Thank you, Katie.
Mm-hmm.
And Rupa, anything you'd want to add to this, given it's obviously such a prevalent issue? If only 10% of adults are getting enough veggies, what advice do you give to your patients and parents?
Sure. I often, tell parents that positive reinforcement is so key. We know that role modeling is one of the best opportunities infants and toddlers have to develop good habits. And I've really found that caregivers often do more for their children than they do for themselves. And, they say, hey, I don't like this vegetable, but I really want my kid to be able to try new things. I don't want them to eat how I ate. And I often tell them, and we go through food exploration as when they were
I'm not sure if we lost Rupa. Can you guys hear me? I'm not sure if it's on my end or, yeah, okay. Okay, we'll hopefully get Rupa back, and I'll move on to Namali. So Namali, I know you are a question for you that I know you're so passionate about is, what if cost or food access is an issue? What tips and tricks do you have to help parents who might be in food deserts or have limited food budgets?
Yeah, this is something I work with my team at our nonprofit Joshua Young Project on, and that is the issue of food waste. So food waste is something that's pervasive. The average American family wastes about $2,000 in food, and a lot of that food could be reused, repurposed, and help make food overall more affordable if we knew what to do with that food. And it's particularly challenging if you're, faced with a tight food budget and you're trying to do this flavor training, to not feel wasteful about that. And so we have developed a lot of tips and tricks in our educational programs. First of all, frozen foods can be a great way to revisit foods in a way that's a little bit easier because the foods are less perishable, and frozen foods are very nutritious. And so instead of having a short shelf life for that bunch of asparagus, we can put it back in the freezer and keep going back to it. Leftovers are another thing that we educate about. And in our meal planner, we have a way that you can use leftovers in meal planning. And I think planning in general makes food waste less pervasive. But if you can take some of those leftovers, put them in the fridge, maybe even in ice cube trays, then you can go back to that practice food over and over again without having to remake that recipe. So I think that's a really important tip. Also, buying foods in season tend to be more affordable if you have access to farmers markets. A lot of those markets do provide more affordable options and ways to buy in smaller quantities that might be easier for your young eaters who are practicing foods and may not need a big quantity. And then also offering small, underwhelming portions is a great way to, first of all, not overwhelm your toddler who's trying foods, but also to not waste food. So I think those can be strategies overall for flavor training and also reducing food waste. We also have a great little tool called the Meal-O-Matic, which is one that I pull up in the office a lot with parents, where you can plug in some of the foods that you have on hand that might be the bits and ends that you thought you'd have to throw away. And you put them into that Meal-O-Matic and you figure out how to make a stir fry or a soup or a salad using those foods that you might otherwise throw away.
Great, that's fantastic. And Namali, just to add to, coming from the food industry, what we know about frozen veggies is they're actually often more nutritious than fresh, because they're picked at the peak of ripeness and then they're frozen versus being picked a couple weeks before they should so that they can ripen on a truck. So it's it's an interesting statistic, and I know we use a ton of frozen in our kitchen here. So okay, so let me go to Katie, and it looks like Rupa's coming back, so we'll get back to Rupa. But Katie, so you and I and so many of the inaugural companies and brands that are in this PHA initiative started our companies because we saw first foods were so important, not only because of the nutrients they provide, but also because of this flavor training. So a question came up here that's related is, can you explain the difference between flavor training and complementary feeding?
Sure, that's a great question. So complementary feeding really focuses on the key nutrients needed during this critical developmental time. So as a baby is being weaned from breast milk or formula and starting to take on more solids, again, the focus would be on introducing foods with iron and zinc and choline, omega-3s, vitamin D, calcium, etc., all the different antioxidants and phytonutrients from various produce. Flavor training, on the other hand, is not necessarily nutrient focused, but focuses on introducing baby to a wide variety of veggies, flavors, spices, different foods as early as 4 to 7 months. So typically these foods are offered one at a time to really encourage the acceptance of this new food. But it could be offered or could be done offering a puree or a very well mashed soft food, or even just the tiniest taste on the end of your finger. So thinking less about, again, the nutrition that's in that food, but more about the introduction and acceptance of a new flavor. Both are obviously really, really important and can be done by offering a wide variety of fruits, veggies, grains, proteins, and healthy fats, etc. And don't forget about those herbs and spices.
Great, thank you, Katie. All right, Rupa, welcome back. So question for you is, when do you get parents to start thinking about first foods? Do you wait till that 6-month visit, or do you get to them earlier?
So I always start talking about solid food right at the 4-month visit. And the reason I do that is because we know that really the AAP says anywhere between 4 to 6 months is great to start talking to parents and caregivers about the importance of introducing new foods. We go over different flavor profiles. We provide them handouts with how important it is for infants to eat from the rainbow from the very beginning. We also go through different choking hazards and which foods to wait on. We talk about highly allergic foods. So definitely the 4-month visit is the perfect time. I always say you don't want to wait till the 6-month visit, because usually parents have already tried something at that point. And so the importance of talking about vegetables first is really key at the 4-month visit.
Great, thank you, Rupa. So want to encourage the audience to go ahead and submit their questions so we can take those. I've got a few more here that I will ask, but we'll take yours as well. So Katie, for you, when you're introducing solids, is it recommended to wait 3 days before introducing any new foods?
So this is another great question, and one, personally, my kids are now 8 and 12, and the recommendations that I was hearing from my pediatrician then versus what we're learning now are very different. So in general, no. So waiting several days in between foods really drastically elongates that window of introducing new foods and flavors. So if we think about this 4 to 7 month period as being when babies are most susceptible to accepting new flavors, and let's say you start solids at 6 months, as recommended by the AAP, then you're really down to this 30-day window when they're most likely and most willing to take on new foods. So that means that you've got, if you're waiting 3 days, you've got 10 new foods by the age of 7 months. So this is really a missed opportunity. And we have to remember that, veggies, meats, fruits, gluten-free, wheat-free grains, and healthy fats all have such a low risk of causing an allergic reaction. So combining these foods on a daily basis shouldn't cause a worry. However, introducing allergens again at 4 to 6 months can help to prevent food allergies from developing. And I would recommend waiting 2 days in between each of those top 8 allergens to look for a GI issue or any other allergic reaction.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. Namali, Rupa, do you guys recommend the same to your parents, to your patients?
Yeah, absolutely. As Katie said, these foods that we're talking about, vegetables in particular, are low allergen foods. So if they can cycle through as many of those as quickly as possible, and the variety is important, as we learned in the paper. If you're exposing children to a variety, they're more likely to expand that variety, right? So we want to include as many tastes and tries in that window, because it closes pretty quickly. And so we want to take advantage of that.
Perfect. Rupa, I'll go to you and Namali too, interested in, given that our audience is so many healthcare professionals, how do you communicate all this to your parents and patients, and how do you make sure they kind of absorb it and don't forget it? It's a lot of information for them, and they're sleep deprived.
I always say that the waiting room is such the perfect time because it's a captive audience. We know that most people wait anywhere between 10 to 15 to 30 minutes for their care provider. And so we've really created this culture where the waiting room is a great opportunity for parents to see the importance of starting foods. We'll have videos on repeat that talk about the introduction of plant-based foods. We have posters all over. We know that in order for parents and caregivers to absorb information, they actually need it in a variety of ways. So, providing them with handouts, doing videos, having posters, making sure that there's information in their after visit summary, which you can pop into Epic using smart phrases. We know that the more information they're hit with, especially as you're talking to them, the more likelihood they're going to not only remember everything that you said, but go home and incorporate those things as well.
Yeah, I agree. There needs to be a number of different ways, because we're all learners in different ways, auditory, visual. And so as much as you can provide to them, we do the same as you, Rupa. We have videos on repeat, a lot of Dr. Yum videos, and parents will come back for their visit and say, wow, I learned to make a bean burrito while I was waiting. So education is embedded in every single part of the experience of coming to the office. We have handouts at key feeding developmental stages too. So at 4 months, like you, Rupa, we do a lot of teaching before babies start foods. We offer them, I have a baby food class in my office that is offered for parents who need that hands-on. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we've not been able to offer that. So we've put that in a webinar format. So I'll encourage parents at the 4-month visit to watch that webinar, which is on demand, and it's actually free and on our website for anyone to use. And using our book, just a number, however we can get the information in, and try to make the experience really all about the joy of eating healthy. so that it doesn't feel like a chore and it feels more inspiring than that. We even have kids picking vegetables in the garden as they leave and learning to eat foods straight from our garden too, which is really fun.
I love that. Those are great tips. Katie, let's go to you. Talk to us about hidden veggies. Do you recommend hidden veggies?
Okay, so in general, no. I will say, every parent feels that when they sneak pumpkin or zucchini into their muffins. Definitely, when I had a 2-year-old and his favorite food was muffins, it was like a goal to get everything into that one muffin. So I totally understand that. But from the perspective of getting your kiddos to like to, learn to like different vegetables, we really need those veggies to be perceptible. So we don't want to hide them or mute them or drown them in fruit. Again, not that it's not great to combine them where we can, but to really let the bitter, the umami, the savory, and even the spicy flavors of veggies really shine through, so that in this critical developmental time where they are more susceptible to liking new veggies, especially, that they're really getting to learn to like the actual vegetable flavor.
Great, thank you. Rupa, Namali, anything different from you guys?
We call it packing in veggies instead of sneaking in veggies. So just because you're packing them into a soup or a sauce or eggs or whatever the vehicle is, doesn't mean you still shouldn't put them on the plate so that children can make friends with them. Packing them in is fine, but you still want to develop that relationship between the child and the vegetable so that they see it and they recognize it and they appreciate it.
Fantastic. Rupa, question for you. I know you like herbs and spices. What do you think about salt?
So I think what we know from the research is, because infants already have a preference to sweet and salty taste, there's really no need to add salt to flavor vegetables when you're starting foods in infancy. We know, just like Katie and Namali have stated, there's that optimal period where the willingness to accept vegetables is so high already through your child's natural developmental stage, that because of that willingness to accept things just as is, that's the perfect time to introduce raw fruits and vegetables in their natural form, because they're likely to try them anyways. We know that sweet peppers, naturally sweet and, have that added taste, and things like squash, all these things that come from the earth are naturally flavored. And so I say there's really no need to add things like salt. We know that as infants get older, the research shows that it is important to eat a dietary pattern, just like the culture of the family. So if you're, of Indian descent, for example, we know that using things like turmeric and ginger to flavor foods early on in infancy, they're more likely to adapt to those foods that you're going to cook for your family later on. So, when it comes to flavors, using the flavors of the heritage of the family is important, but you don't need to drown any tastes in sugar or salt.
You're muted.
Sorry, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn to a couple questions from the Q&A now. So, Katie, can you list the top 8 allergens?
Oh, goodness, on the spot. Okay, so peanuts, tree nuts, soy, wheat, eggs, milk. What have I not said? Oh, fish and shellfish.
Oh, yeah.
Good. I wasn't sure if I had them all. Okay. So another one, Namali, I'll turn this one to you. So why do young eaters almost universally dislike green and leafy foods?
It's so sad that they do. It's probably the bitter taste. I think green gets a bad rap too. So, one of the things that we do at our teaching kitchen is we get kids to pick those leafy greens, and we get them. I think that sensory confidence, especially as kids get older, is really important. So having them smell, taste, eventually taste, but touch and appreciate, right, and describe and use emerging developmental vocabulary and things like that is really important. So we get kids to get in the garden, pick those veggies, and then we bring them in and we'll have them massage those kale leaves with oil, and, you know, make kale chips out of them with little spice blends, and try them in a new way that maybe will be a little bit more approachable, especially for our most hesitant eaters. Providing a little bit of a food chain can be helpful. And I know we don't want to mask the taste of vegetables, but sometimes we have those hesitant eaters that need a little bit more reassurance, and they need to take those baby steps. So that sensory confidence and providing some food chains also can really be helpful for those eaters. It's a shame because I think a lot of parents give up on those leafy greens before they get to see their return on investment of trying and trying and trying. So keep encouraging. For sure.
Yeah, great advice. Rupa, what about organic veggies? Should we be offering our kids organic veggies? What's your take on that?
Sure. So, in general, my top priority is always just getting vegetables in. And I always think that is the most important of all. And how you get that in, whether it's organic or not organic, is, really up to the family as well as their budget. I am a proponent of, the environmental working group. So I always say, if it is in your budget, looking at the clean 15 and the dirty dozen when it comes to fruits and vegetables, and seeing, okay, if I have the budget to buy certain vegetables organic, what is on the dirty dozen? Maybe I'll pick the top 3 from that. I always say is a consideration that we talk to parents about, but overall, just making sure you get the variety in of vegetables is the top priority.
Perfect. Thank you. Namali, another one from the audience. So what do you think the role of child care centers are in exposing our kids to new foods?
Oh, huge. 60% of kids are cared for by someone other than their own family members in their own household. So this is why we've been so passionate about teaching teachers and child caregivers in preschools, daycares, Head Starts, to provide that education on early introduction of fruits and vegetables. And we have found through our research that cooking with children in the classroom actually does change how much they are willing to try foods. It changes the variety of foods they're willing to try, and they're less apt to refuse foods. And we've done this just with 9 cooking lessons within childcare centers, and the change is quite dramatic.
Incredible. And Rupa, how about you? I know you teach to medical students, but do you also do childcare centers, or what's your view on that?
So yeah, one of the things we do in our culinary medicine course with first-year medical students as well as fourth-year medical students is we actually have them teach, and we pair up with different elementary schools in our area, and we have the medical students teach the elementary school students how to eat certain foods, how to cook certain foods. Just like Namali mentioned, we know that when children cook food, they're more likely to eat it. And when there's a role model, such as, medical student, caregiver, teacher, that introduces the food, they're also more likely to eat it. So I think, as health professionals, we have the great opportunity to mentor those in our community. And I think it's always wonderful when we can go out and really collaborate and partner with different childcare centers.
Great. So much of what you're saying, it just resonates. As a mom, I definitely see these things when my kids are more involved in the food. And I know they've been going to the grocery store a little less during the pandemic, but trying to do gardens and things, it really has been helpful. Katie, let's question for you. So what do you think about raw vegetables? Is it safe to introduce raw vegetables, or when is it safe? And would love your view on that.
Okay. So definitely, we have to think about choking hazards first, right? So there's a reason why we're offering soft, mashed, pureed food to babies. They simply just don't have the teeth to be chewing a raw carrot. They really need molars at that point to be able to properly chew and swallow those foods. So really thinking about, are they ready to eat that raw food? The other consideration is that we know that certain raw foods are very, very starchy and difficult to digest. So thinking about when the baby's tummy is more ready to take on that raw veggie. So a cruciferous vegetable, potatoes, for example, are a lot tougher on an adult tummy as well as on a baby's tummy to digest. We recommend around 8 months or so to introduce more of those cruciferous vegetables, cooked even. Of course, little bites here and there are totally fine, but if you're thinking about a large serving of broccoli, for example, you might want to wait a few months into introducing solids to make sure their tummies, you don't get that gassy, screaming baby as we've all had. It's the worst.
And Katie, what about beans in there? What is your take on?
Yeah, again, I think, babies digest things differently at different times. Lentils are easier to digest than white beans, for example. And I would just start small. So instead of giving your baby, a whole 4-ounce serving of white beans, maybe introduce them with other vegetables, healthy fats, etc. See how they react to a smaller amount of that food and then gradually increase. As with so many things, right? We have to also just listen to our baby's cues and our cues as a mom and see how it's going.
Yeah, definitely. I know we did a lot of soaking of beans to kind of aid in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so Namali, let me turn this one to you. I know we've answered a bit of this, but this came from the Great Plains Tribal Health Board. So they're asking how to garner support from other family care for providers and teachers. So I know we've talked a bit about family and parents and caregivers, and we've talked about daycares. Are there other groups that you try to get support in, your new parents to get support in this journey?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because, in our work, we started off really focused on children. And what we realized is we can't just teach children how to eat better. We have to teach the family to eat better. And then we have to have community support and infrastructure too, to be able to support that family eating better. So there has to be access to healthy food. There has to be a culture of eating healthy and being healthy, a culture of wellness, let's say, in a community. So it's slow and steady work, but I think communication, one little piece of advice I can give is communication between a child's own pediatrician and the children or the people in that child's life can go a long way. So one of the things that I do is I send a letter to family members, teachers, community members, Girl Scout leaders, whatever it is. If I have a child who's really struggling with diet-related illness and that needs to be relayed to all those touch points in a child's life, I send a letter and I call it a mindful mentor letter. So it's gentle and it really helps the adult who's receiving the letter to feel included in that child's journey too, and feel empowered to help the child. So that's something that I've found very effective. And I've even picked up the phone and called some of those folks. And for parents too, co-parenting can be tricky as well. Sometimes there's one parent who may have an approach that's different from another parent. So I may encourage both parents to come in so that we can all get on the same page, or send a mindful mentor letter back to the parent who isn't able to attend. So it's just sort of bringing people together in the spirit of helping that child, really.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to take, I think, just another question. I'll throw this to the group. So how can policy play a role in helping to address this early introduction of vegetables? If you guys had your wish list, what would you hope for from the government?
I'll just jump on this just because the new USDA dietary guidelines came out earlier this year. And it was the first time they really put an emphasis on the importance of vegetables as an early introduction in infancy. And I think the reason they put that out is because they're really finding food is medicine in the wake of the pandemic. The opportunity for health professionals to talk about, eating vegetables, the importance, how it, affects the immune system, how it affects the immune response, how it leads to better health outcomes. I think more and more policymakers are understanding the role food has in healthcare. And I think the USDA hopping on that bandwagon over the last 6 months has been a great added initiative to the different opportunities that we can do.
Fantastic. Namali, Katie, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I'll hop in here as well. So my past life is as a nutritionist at Starbucks, and I worked on the regulatory affairs team. So I really got to understand how products were marketed, how they could be misleadingly marketed, unfortunately. And this is really what started the fire in me to start Square Baby, is that I found that as a parent cruising the aisle, so many of the meals were unbalanced and fruit heavy, but their marketing made it look as though it was this balanced meal and all this kale, and look at what a great, healthy, balanced product this is. So my hope would be that there'd be more regulations on how products are marketed, really just to help parents in that moment. When you're in a grocery store, especially, you've got seconds to make these decisions. You're trying to pull a bajillion meals. You might have a screaming baby in your cart and a toddler who's, going to find Cheetos in the aisle. I don't know where that came from. But definitely not personal experience. Yes, but to just, wanting to have more regulations around how products are marketed to help parents find truly what they're looking for.
Great. Perfect.
Yeah, I would also add expansion of federal programs in terms of providing more access to fruits and vegetables for those who need those services, and in expanding the education piece of those programs as well through wonderful apps and things that I've been seeing, like the WIC Shopper app, which provides education modules and help for families who are needing recipes and knowing how to use those foods, I think is really helpful. And then I would also say more infrastructure to expand the use of farmers markets and the great local produce that happens to be within communities. I wish that, there was a little bit more standardized infrastructure for benefits like SNAP and WIC to be used nationwide in places like farmers markets, where there's such good, affordable, delicious produce that our children can learn to grow up eating.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, it looks like we are out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists for just sharing your expertise, sharing these tips. I hope our audience enjoyed the conversation, and I know this is just the beginning. So it's a journey that we hope that you join us on. And PHA has developed some tools to share that will kind of help you in helping this whole journey of more veggies early and often. So with that, I'll hand it back to Ella. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to our panelists. I just want to close by saying, how helpful it is, that you all are here today sharing your expertise, and just really appreciate, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the call, but for everybody who's joining us today, the folks that you're hearing from are from our inaugural partners for this campaign. So this campaign is a coalition of medical professionals, of early childhood educators, and of industry leaders. And so the folks that you're hearing from today are some of our broader group that are really helping us to drive systemic change. And I love that last question. I just want to touch on it for one more second, because PHA's approach is really a systems approach, and we like to talk about PHA about big P policy, sort of federal policy and things like that. And then little P policy, both in terms of what companies can do. And so one of the big things that I just want to emphasize that we didn't bring up in this, but if you, as we share more information about our campaign, companies that are part of this are either making voluntary business practice changes to reformulate their products to say that they're veggie forward. And we're in conversation about with them about that, so that as they use the logo, the Veggies Early and Often logo, that a parent or a caregiver can rely that is a reliable indicator of a meaningful amount of veggies in the product. And so this is really a campaign that is formed because of the research, and we are just beginning to identify ways to disseminate that within our key audiences of the medical professionals, of early childhood educators, and of industry leaders. So really appreciate your time. I want to close just by circling back to our call to action. So what we hope you do is that we know that parents and caregivers turn to you for advice about how to feed your kids. And we know that you play a critical role in helping us raise a generation of veggie lovers. And so I just want to say that we as a campaign, as PHA, with the folks on the call and others that are part of this, have developed 2 resources to support you. And to access these materials, you can visit PHA's website at ahealthieramerica.org to download the research paper, which is the image that you see on the left. Yes, kids can learn to love veggies, and also our infographic. And so we're hoping that this infographic is a tool that you can use to start conversations with your patients about veggies early and often. And these are just 2 things. So we're putting it out there to you all today that we want to continue the conversation. So we'd welcome your thoughts on what more we could be doing, and would invite you to send us an email at info@ahealthieramerica.org. So this is open to you to be in touch about how we can better support you with this work. So that is it for our call today. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for teaming up with us to raise a generation of veggie lovers. PHA's next event is going to be on May 12th. And it is our virtual summit. So it's featuring our honorary chair, Michelle Obama. We'll be highlighting PHA partners, and we'll be talking about how we can address health equity. And we invite you to sign up for that for free on our website. And with that, I hope that everyone has a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.